Wait,
Yeah, it works. Thanks.
why do you want to record it? Oh, to put it up on the internet.
You guessed it. Wow, you feel you're very advanced.
Oh yes, so advanced. Oh my.
Okay, we're on Daf Nun Vav. We're on the second line.
Wait, so could someone give that to me in English, please?
56A1.
56.
56A1. Okay.
Okay, then we're ready to go.
And I'll just mention that Rav Brizon would prefer to leave questions to the end so that he can make sure to cover the material first. So
Okay, then. So this Gemara, which we're about to learn, that records a machlokas between Shmuel and Rav, relates to the Mishnah back on 53b. Okay, then. So the Mishnah tells us that there are many different ways that a Yavam could be Kona his Yevama. For example, he could do it b'shogeg. He doesn't realize that it's a Yevama. He thinks mistakenly it's his own wife. Or be ones, against her will. Or ma'ara. Ma'ara means tchilas bia.
The Rachel Leah thing. Yeah.
In
Sorry.
all, what did I miss? Did I miss a joke?
No, I said the old Rachel Leah trick. It's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so again, we're going to try to fit this all in, and now we're down to 50 minutes. Okay, fine. So in all these cases, the Mishnah says that he was Kona his Yevama, and the Gemara explains earlier that we derive that from the pasuk in the parsha of Yibum called Yevama Yavo Oleha. Oleha means even in all these, so to speak, secondary kinds of ways of doing bia. Lamai Kana. What is the extent of this kinyan? Rav Amar Kana Lakol. It's an all-inclusive kinyan. It's 100%. Once we have the ribui to include Yevama Yavolea, even Bishogeg, and even Balkarcha against her will Bionis, and even B'Mahara, the Tchilas Bia, then he's Kona for everything. And if he's a Kohen, then she could eat Truma. Shmuel Amar Lo Kana El Lidvarim Hamurim B'Parsha. Shmuel says that the kinyan in these cases is a limited kinyan. The Torah was only mar b'yavama yavoleh for that mitzvah of Yibum that's written there in the parsha, and all the dinim of Yibum that appear in the parsha, they apply to this kinyan. For example, lirash bin nichsei achiv, the estate of the deceased brother is now transferred and inherited by the yavam. All lefocho min hayibum. For example, she no longer needs chalitza. He has accomplished yibum. Her tzara does not need neither yibum nor chalitza. These are called, in Shmuel's terminology, dvarim ha'amurim beparsha. However, beyond that, there are a number of elements and dimensions of marriage, of issues, which are not mentioned in the parsha of Yibum. And those are effectuated and come into action with nisuin. Nisuin means chuppah. And those are, number one, achilas truma in the case of a Bas Yisrael married to a Kohen. 2, Yerusha, when she dies, who inherits her? And 3, mitamila, if he's a Kohen, does he bury her? And 4, hafaras nidarim. All those elements are called full-fledged ishus, which means nisuin. And he has not accomplished nisuin without das, without her agreement, without his intention, and without a complete bia. And ha'ara is not enough. That's the sheet of Shmuel. So the nafkamina now between Rav and Shmuel is going to be the following case. He, the Yavam, was ba'aleha b'bia grua, with a secondary kind of bia. Does she have the rights to eat truma if he's a Kohen? Rav would say yes, and Shmuel would say no. The Gemara explains, Min hanisuin l'divrei hakol achla. In a case where the late brother to whom she was married before he died was already a noseoso, which means he took her into the chuppah. So we have two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven married Rachel and took her into the chuppah with a full-fledged nisuin, and then Reuven died without leaving children. In such a case, if Reuven is a Kohen, then his wife Rachel has already begun to eat truma. With Reuven's death, she falls for Yibum to Shimon, who's also a Kohen, and she continues eating truma. That was never an issue of debate. The Havya Havis Ka'achla Meikara. Once she gained the license to eat truma, then with Zikas Yibum, after the death of her husband Reuven, she continues that license to eat truma. Ki pligi, but the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel is mina erison. In a case where Reuven married Rachel, but only the first stage of marriage, which is called erison. In such a case, she did not eat truma. Now, why after erison the wife of a Kohen does not eat truma is a subject of great debate. Not for us now. That's a sugya unto itself. It has to do with simpon, that maybe when he marries her, he'll find out that she had a mum. It has to do with the fact that if we allow her to eat truma, she might feed truma to our relatives who are not Kohanim. In any event, as far as Erison is concerned, she does not eat truma. Therefore, if Reuven was Ma'ares Rachel and then Reuven died, it means that his wife Rachel, who's a Bas Yisrael, had never eaten truma. Then she will not eat truma by virtue of her falling to Yibum to Shimon, Reuven's brother. That's the shita of Shmuel. Rav Amar al Cheles. Rav says that once Shimon was Koneh Rachel through any of the methods that we described above, then Kana Lakol, it's a complete kinyan, and therefore she has a status of Nesua. As a Nesua, she eats truma because her husband, Shimon, the Yavam, is a Kohen. The Rabbi Rachmana Bia Shogeg Kimezid, we have a ribui that includes Yevama Yavoleh, even in a case of Shogeg, where he didn't have any intention to be Miyabima, and the Torah upgrades that to the status of a full-fledged Kinyan, and it's equal to Ashes Ish. She's married totally to the Yavam. And therefore, she eats truma. Shmuel Omar, Shmuel says, Ki Rabbi Rachman Alukmei b'makom ba'al. Shmuel says that the ribui that teaches us that this second-rate bia of shogeg, for example, is enough to be kona. It's only a kinyan that extends the original erison in the relationship between the late Reuven and his wife Rachel Yevamot. And now Shimon steps into the shoes of Reuven. And just like Reuven's relationship to his wife, Rachel, was that of erison, which means that she does not eat truma, so too Shimon the Yavam's relationship to Rachel after the bia grua, the second-rate bia of shogeg, etc., is equal to that of the relationship between Reuven and Rachel, namely it's only erison. But la lume mi ba lo, he, Shimon, through this second-rate Maisa Bia, cannot create an Ishus relationship that goes beyond the Ishus that existed between the late Reuven and his wife Rachel. And since Rachel in that context could not eat Truma because the relationship was only that of erison, therefore, within the context of a Bia Gemura vis-a-vis Shimon, Rachel continues to be in the state of erison. And therefore, there is no right or license for her to eat truma. The Azla Shmuel L'tameh. Shmuel is consistent. The Omer of Nachman Omer Shmuel, Kol Shabal Machil, Yavam Machil. If the Baal, meaning Reuven, the late Reuven, was Machil, he gave his wife Rachel the right to eat truma because he had already taken her into the chuppah, and with the Nisuin she eats truma. Then the Yavam, after Reuven's death, through a bia grua, second-rate bia, will likewise continue that status quo that existed at the time of Reuven, and therefore Rachel the wife of Reuven will now continue to eat truma. But kol she'ena bal machil, if the relationship between Rachel and the late Reuven was such that he could not give her rights to eat truma because it was not a full-fledged marriage, it was only erisin, Yavam eno machil. Likewise, Shimon could not give Rachel, the Yevamot, the rights and the license to eat truma because he cannot exceed beyond the rights that she had within the framework of the marriage of the late Reuven. Mesve, the Gemara asks a kash on Shmuel. Bas Yisrael pikachas. She is a bar das. This arsel Kohen pikeach. And he, the Kohen, is also likewise a pikeach. And we're talking about erison. Below hispik lekonta, he has not yet got the opportunity to take her into the chuppah and to complete the marriage, the ishus, and upgrade it to the status of Nesuin. Ad shenischarish. Nischarish means he never had a terrible accident from which he became, listen carefully, deaf, but also mute. He's a cheresh she'eno midaber v'eno shomea, which means that a cheresh who is not capable of hearing, but he can communicate by speech, he's called a bardas. We're talking about a cheresh she'eno shomea v'eno midaber, and his status is that of a lav bardas. He doesn't have das. Eno cheles. She will not eat truma. And the reason for that is because he doesn't have das to bring her into the chuppah and make a knisa l'nisuin. So she remains in arusa, and arusa doesn't eat truma. Nafla lifnei yavam. Now, Reuven dies. She falls for Yibum to Shimon. And Yavam is cheresh, which means that Shimon is now a deaf mute. And maybe it runs in the family. And it's genetic. I don't know. Is then Ocheles. She can eat truma. Why? Why does the Yavam, Shimon, give Rachel the license to eat truma, whereas the late Reuven could not give a license to eat truma? And the answer is very fundamental. Because the Torah established Yibum without das. As we said before, he was miyabim her, and he didn't even realize he was being miyabim her. He thought he was having a relationship with his wife, and we're going to have cases where he was forced to have the relationship. If you recall the Gemara back on Daf Dalet. She doesn't have any interest in Yibum. He took a Bal Karcha. There's no das over here. And yet the Torah establishes that the Yibum is complete even without das. So that even if the Yavam became a Cheresh, nevertheless, through his Maisa Yibum, he is Konar, a complete Kinyan like Nisuin, such that now he allows her the license to eat Truma. Ubazu Yafa Koach HaYavam Mikoach HaBaal. The Yavam exceeds the power of the Baal. Shimon has more power here than Reuven. Ishleim Rav, I can understand this according to Rav, because Rav is of the opinion that even a Yevamot min ha'erisin, who never ate Truma in her life, nevertheless, she can eat Truma, even though the Yavam, Shimon, was Boelha, what we call a Bia Grua, Nicha. Now the Brisa makes a lot of sense, because even though she didn't eat Truma under Reuven, a late husband, she can eat Truma under Shimon or Yavam. And the reason for that is because Yavam could be Kona, a Kinyan Gomor, a complete Kinyan, even with a Bia Gemura, such that now she has the status of a Nesua. And as a Nesua, married to a Kohen, she eats Truma. Ela Shmuel, but Shmuel says that if she didn't eat Truma already under Reuven, her original husband, then Shimon does not have the ability to grant her a right to eat Truma that would exceed the right that Reuven, the late Reuven, had. Is Kasha. What is he going to do with this brisa? And the Gemara answers, Shmuel, let's interpret the brisa in the following way. We're talking about a Pasisol Pikachas. She's working with a full deck, and she had Erison for a Kohen who's a Pikeach. He's working with a full deck. For his Pikla Kontach and his Charesh, he became a cherish, a deaf mute, before he brought her into the chuppah, Eina ocheles b'truma. She cannot eat truma. And the reason for that is because at the time of Nisuin of chuppah, he was a lav bar das, he was a cherish. And therefore there was no kinyan Nisuin. And a married woman could eat truma by virtue of her Kohen husband only after Nisuin, but not with Erison for any number of reasons, as we indicated earlier. Says the Brisa Kanas, if on the other hand, and now Shmuel is introducing another piece into this Brisa, there was a Knisa lechuppah while the Kohen, meaning Ruvain, was a Pikeach, the Achakach Nischaresh. He lost his wits about him, his status as a Ben Das, after the Knisa lechuppah, and Ocheles. Then she eats Truma, and therefore Mace, when Ruvain dies and she, Rachel, his wife, has already begun to exercise and implement her rights to eat Truma, she continues under the Yavam Shimon to eat Truma, Nafla Lifnei Yavam Cheresh, even though the Yavam has no Das, Ocheles, she can eat Truma. And now let's talk about the Bia and the Yibum action of this Cheresh. He's a Labar Das. So that there's no Das in the Bia of Yibum. How could it possibly generate Nisuin? And the answer is that in this case, even Shmuel agrees that she can continue her original situation of eating Truma. And why? Because the Torah was Mechadesh that even in a case of a Lav Bar Das, namely a Cheresh, he can implement the act of Yibum and make her into a full-fledged Ashes Ish, a Nesua, such that now she can eat Truma. Umay Bazu, and what does the Brisa mean when it says Yafa Koach HaYavam? He has a power that exceeds that of the late brother. As far as Reuben is concerned, the original husband, if he would have wanted to grant her license to eat Truma, is Cheresh Meikara Lo Cheles. If he was a Cheresh at the time that they entered into the Nisuin, she would not eat Truma because he cannot be Kona her with a Kinyan Nisuin by virtue of a Chuppah. When he's a Lav Bar Das, he's a Cheresh Ve'ilu Yavam. A Yavam who's a Cheresh Meikara, he can give her rights to eat Truma even with a Bia Grua, because that Ishus is recognized by the Torah as a Kinyan Yavam. And on the side, again, this is just a comment that you might want to think about. When we talk about a woman who's eating Truma, and that only can exist as long as she's married to a Kohen, we have to assume that in our context, even after the death of her husband, the Kohen, since she falls for Yibum to his brother Shimon, who's a Kohen, that's why she could continue eating Truma. And the Gemara says that a Yavam, even if he's a Cheresh and he's a Lav Bar Das, he can effectuate the Kinyan Ishus of Kinyan Yibum, even though he's a Lav Bar Das. And this, by the way, is very problematic with Rashi back, if you recall, about Yoshen. Rashi says that if the Yavam is sleeping and somehow he has a Kishui, and they brought the Yavam on top of him, and Rashi says he cannot be Kono with Yibum because he's a Lav Bar Das. Interesting. Person is sleeping, Rashi identifies him as a Lav Bar Das, and therefore there's no Yibum. And the Pella is, our Gemara establishes here, black on white, that a Cheresh could be Miyabim, be Bumei Torah, and create a full-fledged Kinyan. Why should Yoshen be any worse than a Cheresh? Problematic. Ika Diamri, now the Gemara is a different alternative transmission of the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Mina Erisim, she fell for Yibum from Erisim. That means that Ruvain, the late Ruvain, gave his wife Rachel Kesef and Shtar. He has not yet brought her into the chuppah. is Divrei Hakol lo achla, since Rachel was not able to eat truma during the lifetime of her husband Reuven because there was no knisa l'chuppah, and during Erison she doesn't have rights to eat truma. Therefore, everybody, even Rav, would agree that with the death of Reuven, she falls for Yibam to Shimon, and if Shimon only did what's called a bia grua, like a case of shogeg, or all the other cases that we said were a secondary fallback bia, then she will not eat truma. Why? Dolo ochla b'chaye baal. The Yavam could not exceed the late Baal, who could not feed her truma because he did not take her into the chuppah. And therefore, even Rav agrees, and in this case, the Yavam, through a bia grua, cannot give her truma, cannot be machil her truma. So what is the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel according to the Ika the Amri? Keep ligimin and asuin. Here's where Rav is going to disagree with Shmuel. And Rav is going to say that since she already had rights to eat truma under Reuven, because Reuven had taken Rachel into the chuppah, there was a full-fledged suin. It's therefore, with his death, when Rachel falls for Yibam to Shimon, Rav Amar Ocheles, she can continue her status quo under the Yavam, and the Yavam extends the ishus of the late Reuven to Havi Achlis Mikara within the context of the original marriage, and the ishus to Reuven, she was eating trua because it was after Nesuin, and that status quo remains untouched even after Reuven dies. Shmuel Amar Eino Cheles. The Torah says Yevama Yavo Alea. Afilu b'shogeg, afilu be'ones, afilu be'hara, etc. All the limudim, all the drushes. Ki Rabbi Rachmana. To what extent did the Torah recognize a bias shogeg in Yibum? Only lidvarim amurim beparsha, only for nachala and to pater har and hatzara from Yibum and chalitza. Aval echol mili. But for other dinim that depend upon the suin, the Torah never upgraded the status of a bia grua to a kinyan nesuin. She remains in the status of an arusa who does not eat truma. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, I have a contradiction from one statement of Shmuel to the other. Ha'amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, kol shabal machil yava machil. That if under the original husband, Reuven, she ate truma, then the Yavam, Shimon, after the death of Reuven, will also be machil her truma. So the Gemara answers, Ema, perhaps we have to reinterpret Rav Nachman's statement in the name of Shmuel. Kol bia shabal machil ba, Yavam machil ba. If there was a bias chuppah, full-fledged bia, with das gemura, total agreement and consent, and the Yavam therefore picks up exactly where his late brother left off, namely with a bia that's machil because there was a full-fledged chuppah with das, is now that the Yavam implemented a bia which was exactly duplicate of the original bia that created Nisuin under the late Reuven, that will allow her to continue eating truma. But kol bia sheino machil ba. If you had a bia under Reuven, if Reuven was ba al Rachel, with a bia without das, like the case of shogeg, like the case of ones, in those situations, the bia would not be koneh. Rachel would not be eating truma under the marriage, which is now erison with Reuven. And likewise, when she falls for Yibam with the death of Reuven to Shimon, she will not eat truma. And basically, if I had to summarize Shmuel's opinion in one lumpish sentence, the Yavam picks up where the Baal left off. He cannot recreate something that doesn't exist anymore. Basically, the Gemara asks a Bryce on Shmuel, Bas Yisrael Pikach Shenisar Silicon Pikach. So his Pikach Saj and his Charage, as we explained earlier. The original husband, Ruvain, became a cheresh before Knisa L'chuppah. Eino cheles, she's not in the Nesua, she remains in Arusa because he's a labardas. Meis v'naflu l'fnei Yavam cheresh, o cheles. Even though the Yavam himself is a cheresh, which means he doesn't have das, and therefore his ma'aseh bia of Yibum is lacking das, and it's a bia grua, nevertheless she can eat truma. Ubazu yafa koach yava mikoach habal. Bishlema l'Rav. I can understand this according to Rav, because Rav is going to explain that if she falls from Yibum in a Erison and she never ate truma, she can't eat truma under the Baal. But he's going to be Metaretz. He'll reinterpret this brisa Kiddutarts Meikara, as Shmuel had originally answered up this brisa and reinterpreted it. That we're talking about a case where the Baal, even though he became a cheresh, she became a cheresh after he took her into the chuppah, and therefore she ate truma, and therefore with the death of Ruvain, Shimon steps into the shoes of Ruvain, and he's machel hatruma. El l'Shmuel, but Shmuel holds that even if she falls for Yibum after the Suin with Ruvain, and she was already eating truma while she was married to Ruvain, now Ruvain dies. If the Yavam Shimon is not miyavima with a bia shel das, then she doesn't eat truma. Is kasha? How are we going to reconcile this brisa with Shmuel with this brisa? Kasha. There's no answer to this question. Tanarab, when we learned in the brisa, As Yisrael pikaka shenis our silicon pikam. Oh, his pikakon shenis charich. Eino cheles. She cannot eat truma because the Baal became a cherish before the nesu, before the chuppah. No ledla ben. But now we have a case where she had a child from her first husband, the Kohen. And that child will eat truma because he's a Kohen. You know the famous joke, right? He paid $500 to have the Reform rabbi make him into a Kohen. So he asked him, why are you a Kohen? Because my father was a Kohen. My grandfather was a Kohen. Anyway, so here's a case where the Ben continues to be a Kohen who eats truma, and therefore he can be machil his mother truma even after the death of her husband, his father. Mesa Ben. Now, not only did she lose her husband, but she also lost her son. And here we have machlokas. Rabbi Nosson Omer Cheles, v'Chachamim Omrim Eino Cheles. I understand the Chachamim very well. That's intuitive. There's no one who can be machal a truma, not her husband who's gone, nor her son who's gone. Is my time at Rabbi Nosson. Omar Rabba says the reasoning that underlies Rabbi Nosson is Hoil Shekfar Achla, since as long as her son was alive, she was able to eat truma, is therefore even after his death, she continues to eat truma. Makes absolutely no sense. Come on, you got to be joking. According to you, Bas Yisrael Shenises L'Kohen, a woman who is a Bas Yisrael, she marries a Kohen, and now her husband dies. Is Mesley, is Teichal B'Truma, she can continue eating Truma even after his death? Why Shekvar Achla? Because she ate Truma while he was alive? Ella, for sure, you have to concede. It came into Misley, once her husband dies, Pakale Kedushase, whatever Kedusha she has, vis-a-vis Achilles Truma Minei, is Paka Mimena, because she no longer has the relation to her husband. Is Hachanami now in the case where she has a relation to Kedushas, Kahuna and Truma through her son, came into Misley, her son died, Paka Kedushase Mina. So how then can Rabbi Nosson say that even after the death of her son, she continues to eat truma? Elam Rav Yosef, you have to understand Rabbi Nosson in a different way. Kasava Rabbi Nosson nisue cheresh machilim b'truma. According to Rabbi Nosson, the whole reason why an arusa doesn't eat truma is because we're afraid that she's still living in her father's house. And again, we're afraid she'll be machal truma to our relatives, or we're afraid that when he later on when she enters into his house, he'll find a mum, etc., etc. That doesn't apply in the case of Nesue Cherich, because although it's technically not Chal, he's Labar Das, but Lamaisa, in reality, he takes her into his home, into his dominion, and therefore all the Chashashos fall by the wayside, and she eats Truma Midin Erisin Midin Kenyan Kaspo. And therefore, we don't have any sort of exera that should apply now. So as a Bas Yisrael Arusa to a Kohen, she can eat Truma. And that logic will apply even in the case where her husband or her son died. The Logazrina Nisue Cheresh Atu Kiddushe Cheresh. We're not going to be afraid that if we allow her to eat Truma in a case where the Nisuin was of a Cheresh, where the Nisuin is not Chal, we're not afraid that therefore somebody's going to conclude that even Kiddushe Cheresh, which is garnished merit, it's not worth a dime, would also be enough to be Machal HaBitru, which is a violation of a Chiyuv Misa B'dei Shamayim. Amalei Abai turns to Rav Yosef and he says, what does this have to do with the fact that she had a son from the Kohen who died? That should be irrelevant. According to your explanation, once there was an Isuin and a Ben was Nolad, so she moved out of her father's house, then even though she's only an Arusa, she can eat Truma. So forget about the Ben. I don't need the Ben to be Machal of the Truma. And the Gemara says this is a case of what we call Aidi. Aidi meaning to maintain the symmetry of the Brisa from the Reisha to the Sefer. Mishum Rabbanon, because the Rabbanon who disagree with Rab Nasa, and they hold that Nesue Cherish cannot be Machal of Truma, and the Gzera still exists and persists, prohibiting her from eating Truma as an Arusa, even after she packs out of her house, as long as there was no Nisuin that is valid halachically. So the Brisa wants to tell us that nevertheless, if she has a son from her late husband, Reuven the Kohen, then Rabbi Nassan is right, and even the Chacham concede to the Shita Rabbi Nassan, she could continue eating Trua because of her Ben. V'liflog Rabbi Nassan alayu b'reisha. Why is it that the Brisa doesn't mention a machlokes in the Reisha? We learned in the Reisha that she doesn't eat Truma because at the time of the Nisuin, her husband was a Cheresh. Rabbi Nassan should have stood up, and argued and contested that opinion and allowed her to eat Truma, even though her husband at the time of Knisa L'Chuppah is a Labar Das. And the Gemara answers, this is a very famous principle in the literary understanding of Mishnayos. Very often, the dissenting view of another Tana will only be formulated after he lets the original Tana finish up the whole story. The Gemara says, listening, Mesa Ben Eina Ocheles. The Mishnah, the Brisa should have said that let's wait until the Rabbanan finish their entire presentation, and they would have said that once the son dies, she no longer can eat Truma, and then it should have mentioned Rabbi Nassan Omer Ocheles. Here's where Rabbi Nassan gets the cue to stand up and argue against the Rabbanan and insist that even after the death of the son, she can continue eating Truma. Now is the siyum. Now is the completion of the words of the Chachamim. Now we're ready for Rabbi Nassan to stand up and argue. It would seem that Rabbi Nassan, since we don't find this in the Brisa, Rabbi Nassan is only arguing on the din of Mesa Ben, but not on the Reisha. And the Gemara says, Kasha, we don't have an answer to this question. Now we go on to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, V'chein haba al achas mikol arayos. And in the case of Ha'ara, which is called Tchilas Bia, she only had a partial penetration, and nevertheless, there's a chiyuv of arayos. The violation of arayos is still intact. Now let's go back to the Mishnah, because if we don't go back to the Mishnah, we're not going to understand this Gemara. Again, for those of you who know the Mishnah by heart, then what I'm saying is superfluous. But just in case, maybe you forgot the Mishnah, let's go back to the beginning of the 6th parak of Yevamot in the Mishnah on Daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis. The Mishnah is divided into 2 parts. You would press the return button if you were writing up the Mishnah with the word v'chein. So see if you could locate with your finger the word v'chein. It is line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the 6th line down from the top in the standard versions of the Vilna Shas. Not going to help you if you have Steinsaltz, as one of the members of my group has. Anyway, do you see the word v'chein, Yitzid? I mean, Yechia. Good. We have the word v'chein. And that word v'chein splits the Mishnah into 2 parts. The first part of the Mishnah refers to what we call a bia grua, which means shogeg, ones, or mezida, etc., etc. And that's a discussion about yibum, so that the motif of the first half of the Mishnah is kinyan yibum. From the word v'chein and on, the motif, the subject matter of this Mishnah shifts to arayos. And the Mishnah establishes that in any case of arayos, or even in less than arayos, which is called chayvei lavim, like a mamzer or nasin, once there was a beginning of a bia, that's enough pasla. If you'll take a look, and you may want to underline right up above the word Gemara, you'll see the word pasla. Pasla means that with this bia, she could no longer marry a Kohen. Velochilek, the Mishnah ends bein bia lebia, whether it's ha'ara, which is the beginning of penetration, or it's the end of penetration, which means a gemar bia. All are the same in the eyes of the law with regard to arayos, which means that you'll be put to death, or yechayv kares, depending upon the nature of the erva, and it passes you to kahuna, and that applies even to chayvei lav. Our sugya that we're about to embark upon, on the bottom of Nun Vav Hamid Aleph, addresses the word v'chein. The word v'chein indicates that B is a derivative of A. That means that A, the first part of the Mishnah, which is the subject of Yibum and Kinyan Yibum, is your paradigm case. B is a derivation, v'chein. And just like you taught us with regard to Kinyan Yibum, that same rule applies to a case of Arayos. Amar Rav Amram, Ha Milsa, Amar Lon Rav Sheshes, and here we turn to Daf Nun Vav Amid Beis. V'adrininu la'aynan. Rav Sheshes transmitted and taught us halacha, which we're about to learn in just a second, and he opened up our eyes to realize that that's exactly what's implicit in the Mishnah. What was the law that he derived from our Mishnah? Eishes Yisrael shenensa afal pishe muteris lebaila psula lekahuna. The Gemara derives from the Parsha of Sota, where it says v'hilo nitfasa in Parshas Naso, that hanasa muteris, which means that if a man's wife was never raped, he could continue his marriage relationship with her. And there's no din of vinitma, and there's no lav. However, in the case of a Kohen, if she's married to a Kohen and she was raped by a Jewish man, I don't know about a non-Jewish man, is a Tosa at the beginning of Ksubis, that's a big sugya, but by a Jewish man, she could no longer remain married to her husband. This is one of the halachic tragedies. Says Rav Sheshes, what about a case of a woman who's married to a Yisrael? And if she's raped, she's allowed to continue her marriage. And here we're going to quote the Baal HaMaor, a very famous principle of Baal HaMaor. The Baal HaMaor says that if not for Rav Sheshes, or those who disagree with Rav Sheshes, we would apply a principle called mitoch. What's mitoch? Mitoch shehutra lebaila, hutra nami lekahuna. If that bia of onus could not generate an isa tuma lebaila, then that bia of onus will not generate a psul kahuna. And Rav Sheshes says, pum fakir. The exact opposite is the truth. Because as far as kahuna is concerned, even a bia seishasish be onus, hassles of a kahuna. V'tana tuna, and Rav Sheshes says, I'll prove it to you from our Mishnah. From which word in the Mishnah v'chein? V'chein ha'ba'al achas mikol arayos hamuras b'torah o psulos. My v'chein. How are you going to understand the word v'chein? My love, it must mean loshna b'shogeg, loshna b'mezid, loshna b'onis, loshna b'rotzah. In all these cases of a bia grua, which are kona b'yevama, and we derive that from drashos, yevama yavo aleha, is even in these cases, pasla lekahuna, katani psala. This bia will make it impossible for her to marry a Kohen. Why? Because this is a bias erva. Eshes ish is an erva like all the other arayos, and it says loshna ones, and then it says psola. We see explicitly, and this is the argument of Sheshes, that even though the bia of this erva, namely the eshes ish in our context, was ba'ones, nevertheless, pasla, the Mishnah says, salo lekahuna, even though she's muteres labaila, who's the Yisrael. And the Gemara rejects it low. My v'chein, you think that the word v'chein is going back to ones? No. It's going back to ha'ara, to tchilas bia. And the v'chein tells you that if a married woman had a relationship with another man, biraton, she consented. But it was only tchilas bia. She's asura labaila b'din tuma, and she's psula lakuna. She can never marry a Kohen. The Gemara says, wait a minute. I can't accept this interpretation that the word v'chein is referring to ha'ara. Ha'ara demah. When you're talking about a woman who is an erva, and you're saying that if she had a be'ila ha'ara, it's considered like a be'ila gemura, ilema darayos, you will not justify the word v'chein if you're referring to arayos. Why? Because then you're saying v'chein, that just like in Yibum, the yavam could be kones yavama through ha'ara tchilas bia, so too in arayos, you've turned the apple cart on from one side to the other, upside down and topsy-turvy. L'meimra da'arayos yalfida miyavama, from the fact that a man can be coded as yavama with ha'ara, therefore, ipso facto, I'm going to derive that in arayos there's a violation of erva with ha'ara. Adarabba, it works the other way around. Yavama yalfida me'arayos. The paradigm of this halacha of ha'ara, that ha'ara is considered gmar bia, is barayos ksiv. Again, if I was face to face, I would test you on this because you learned this Gemara earlier. It says in the word nida, in the parsha of nida, it says heraba, and that's the source for ha'ara. And also in Chayvei Lavim, we derive from Shivcha Charufa, where the Torah says Shivcha Zera, implying that other Chayvei Lavim you would suffice with tchilas bia, even though it's not Shivcha Zora. And we have Gzeira Shava, if you might recall, back on Daf Nun Dalid, of bia michayvei lavim. from that Bia, because it says in the parsha of Chavelav and Bia, and it also says in the parsha of Yibum, Yavo Alea V'Yibma, and that Gzeira Shava of Bia teaches me that in Yibum he could be coded as Yevamot with Ha'ara with Tchilas Bia, but that's a derivative of Chayve Lavim of Arayos. Ella says the Gemara, we have to reinterpret the Tan of our Mishnah and the word V'chein. My V'chein, Ashalo Kedarka Darayos. And now the Gemara thinks that the Bia Shalo Kedarka in Arayos, which you're chayav for, is a derivative of Yibum. Because in the Parsha of Yibum, it says, Ulakacha lo le'isha v'yibma, and the extra word, le'isha, teaches me even shalo kedarka through the back, and he could be kones Yevamot with a bia shalo kedarka. And from thence, we derive the conclusion that in Arayos, you will be chayav for an erva in a bia shalo kedarka. Mar says you're making a big mistake. You think that the prototype and the teacher for all eternity of bia shalo kedarka is Yibum. That's not so. Yibum itself is a derivative of Arayos, because in Yibum, the whole purpose of Yibum is lahakim shem liachiv, which I hate to tell you, my friends, cannot be accomplished with bia shalo kedarka. No way. But we're going to derive Yibum from Arayos. And where do we know that bia shalo kedarka is chayv in Arayos? Adrabah ikar mishkevei isha be'Arayos ksiv, in the parsha of Arayos in Vayikra Perek Chaf, which I believe is Achrimos. It says there, mishkevei isha, isha sher yishkav zocher mishkevei isha, and the plural mishkevei teaches me even bia shalo kedarka. And from the Gzeira Shava that equates Yibum with Arayos, we're going to derive the conclusion that a Yavam could be kodes Yevama with a bia shalo kedarka, because the Havmina was you need lahakim shem liachim. Ella says the Gemara, my v'chein shalo kedarka t'chayvei lavim. We're talking about shalo kedarka, for example, in a case of almana l'kohen gadol, or a grusha to a kohen hedja, and he had a bia shalo kedarka. And in such a case, he violates the Isur of kahuna, which is called lav de kahuna. There's a whole discussion here about why we have to mention kahuna here and not mamzeres and so forth and so on. But be that as it may, from the fact that in chayvei lavim of kahuna, we have the pasuk mishkevei isha, and he's chayav even for shalo kedarka, this is going to teach me that in the case of Yavam, he could be miyabem eishes achiv with a bia shalo kedarka, and he's konar. And not only that, but he passes her for kahuna in the case of chayvei lavim with a bia shalo kedarka, because she becomes what's called a chalola. Therefore, our Mishnah, bottom line, is not a proof to Rav Sheshes, because Rav Sheshes is talking about a case of Eishesi Shenensa, and he builds his case on the extra v'chein in the Mishnah, and that is not acceptable. Our final conclusion in interpreting the word v'chein is it's referring to bia shalo kedarka. It has nothing to do with the bias ones, and to generate an Isur al baila, we need a bias ratzon, and in a bias ones with an Eishes Yisrael, she doesn't even become a chalala or a zona who's psula lekuna. Omar Rabba, Eishes Kohen Shenensa, where you have a case of a wife of a Kohen and another person had a relationship with her. Ba'ones, he raped her. And Asura al-Baila, she becomes prohibited to her husband, the Kohen, and this is based on an extra word, vehi, in the Parsha of Sota, in Bamidbar Hey that we mentioned earlier. It says, v'shachav ish osa shichva zora, v'nela me'ena isha v'nisra vehi nitma'a. And then it says, v'eid einva vehi lo nitfasa, which means if she willingly had this relationship, then there's an Isur Tumah, But if she was nitfasa, then there's no Israel baila, but vehi comes to exclude baila Kohen. And therefore, says Rabbah, if an Ashes Kohen was raped by a Jewish man, if the Kohen, her husband, would then subsequently have a relationship with her, baila lokel leah, her husband will get malchus. Mishum tuma. Is that what it says? I'm just testing you to see if you're awake. Because Yitzi he just turned on his Zoom. I don't know if he's there or not. And the other guy just has his phone number. So I don't know if he's there or not. Hello? Forget it. Anyway, I once had a Zoom class. I had 16 people in the Shia, and not one of them opened up the camera. I banged my head on the table and I walked out of the Shia. I will not teach names. I teach people. And people requires that I see you. Okay. Anyway, local lev mishum zona, it says, not mishum tuma. Frekti gemare mishum zona in mishum tuma lo. After all, the im lo nitfasa, which excludes ones, has the mute of he, and tells me that in an Ashes Kohen, we don't exclude an ones situation, which means that she's included under the nitma. So there's a lav of tuma. Why does Rabbah only focus on zona? Ema af mishum zona, classic Talmudic answer. Af mishum zona. Not only does he violate the lav of tuma, but in addition to boot, he violates the lav of zona. That equals 78 malchus. Whoa. My back is hurting me just thinking about it. Masiv Rab Zera is going to ask a kasha on Rabbah from a brisa. The brisa says, "V'hilo nitfasa asura ha nitfasa muteres v'yesh lachacheres afalpi shenitfasa asura ve'zuzu Ashes Kohen." So the word "v'hi" is telling me that there's a mute that excludes Ashes Kohen, which means the exclusion of ones is excluded in the case of Ashes Kohen. We have an exclusion of an exclusion. And therefore, in the case of ones, she is asur al baila. In an Ashes Kohen shenen, so afal pishin itfasa, it was ones asura, the ezezu Ashes Kohen. Now the brisa says, v'lav haba mechal essay. This isur of Ashes Kohen shenensa is derived from an essay. It's a lav haba mechal essay. A lav that's derived from an essay has the status of an essay, and it doesn't generate malchus. Omar Rabbah says you have to understand lumdus here. This is pure lumdus. He says hakol hayu bichlal zona. Initially, any woman who during her marriage period out of beila to another man is called a zona. Ukshapir lecha kosev legabe Ashes Yisrael v'hilo nitfasa hanitfasa muteres, to be matter the case of Ashes ish shenensa. And it's telling me that if it's below nitfasa, means she had ratzon for this adulterous act, then asura, she can no longer live with her husband. Hanitfasa muteres, michlal deishes kohen kidikaima kaima. Now we apply he, and through the mute of he, we go back to the original state of zona, and therefore kaima. Therefore, she gets a lav. And if he has relations, it's a chiyuv malchus. Ve'ika diamri omer Rabbah Ashes Kohen shenensa is baila loka lev mishum tuma in mishum zona lo alma biones lo karina bezona. So the Gemara now has a different transmission of Rabbah, and in the case of ones, she's not called a zona. In order to be a zona with an isakuna, she has to have ratzon. Masiv Rab Zera has a kasha. We have a brisa that says v'hilo nitfasa asura hanitfasa muteres v'yesh lacheres shafal pishi nitfasa asura ezuzu Ashes Kohen So how are we going to justify this brisa that apparently holds that there's no malchus for Tumah? It's only an essay. Amar Rava Hakol Hoya Bichlal. The same logic that we saw in Rabbah. Everything was included in the Iser Tumah initially. Any kind of situation where a married woman had a relationship with another man. And Achrei Asher Hu Tumah, Sheparat Lecha Kosu Gabe Eishes Yisrael V'lo Nitfasa Asura Nitfasa Muteres. And it took an ones out of the category of the Iser Tumah. That's only he, but not Eishes Kohen. And Michal Eishes Kohen can kaima. We go back to the original state of an Iser Tumah. Thank you so much. Wish everyone a great day and a great week. Okay, then.
Rabbi, do you have time for a question?
And if there are any questions now, it's a good time to ask me questions. I tried to keep within 55 minutes. I lost a few minutes at the beginning, so I felt you owed me back those few minutes.
When you said, thank you so much. When you said a Rusa who falls to Yibum from a Cheresh, and the Yavam is also a Cheresh, so he kind of takes on that she's his Arusa again. Is he allowed to stay with her after the first Bia? She's just an Arusa to him, the so-called Arusa to him?
No, once he does the Bia, once the Karish does the Bia, he's kind of her totally.
Unless there's some Easter involved. I mean, if you tell me that she's an Isha Psula, then we'd only apply, as the Gemara is going to say later on, Ese Dochalosa said for the first Bia, but not for the second Bia. But that's only in a case where the Torah prohibits that Yibum and only allows it because of Ese Dochalosa. But if there's no problems and there are no issues that separate the Yavam and the Yavama, then certainly we hope that he will continue in that marriage and not divorce her after the Bia Rishona. I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know.
Oh, but if it's a Bia Grua.
I hear a voice, by the way. Where's this voice coming from? I'm just curious.
I don't know. Can you see me? I'm here.
I see just a hand. You know, this is called a treifa. A treifa is when the animal sticks out its hand, you know.
Right.
Jack Shaheen.
Jack Shaheen. Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Jack.
Hi. So if it's a Bia Grua by the Yavam, he's doing a Bia Grua because he's a Cherish. So he only takes her to a, you said like to a, from she was an Arusa, now she's like so-called Arusa again, but he did the Bia. So you said he doesn't, according to Shmuel, he doesn't allow her to eat Truma, he doesn't inherit her Peros, but does he continue staying with her?
Why not? Again, there's no Isser between him and her, but the only problem is that he will not have certain rights of Nesuin through a Bia Grua. Now, I think what you're asking, and I think I have an answer to your question, is the following. With the second Bia, which is not a Bia Grua, can Shmuel accept that now he completes the Nesuin in that which was missing and lacking in the Nesuin? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. Because...
Even though he's a Cherish, yeah.
Oh, in the case of a Cherish. Well, wait a minute. Let's go through two stages. Stage number one, forget about a Cherish. Let's just talk about the following scenario. A Yavam who is a Kohen and he, pardon the expression, he rapes the Yavama against her will. According to Shmuel, she will not eat Truma. What happens if now the Yavam will implement a second Bia with her consent in such a way that that Bia would constitute Nisuin and it would be a full-fledged chuppah? Then Shmuel would concede that henceforth she will eat Truma. She's married to a Kohen and it's a full-fledged Nisuin. Now you're asking me another question. What happens in a case where the Yavam is a Cheresh? Then according to Shmuel, there's no way under the sun that he could accomplish a full-fledged bias chuppah with a chalos nesuin because he's a labar das, and nesuin requires das. When and how, or let's say the other way around, how and when will she be able to eat truma? And I believe the answer to that question is only when she has a child from her husband, because then the child is a Kohen, he eats truma and he's machil her truma. But up until that point, they're just in a state of erison, and in a state of erison, the Rabbanan made a gzera prohibiting an arusa who's married to a Kohen from eating truma for one of various reasons.
But
Thank you. I have to go. Thank you very much.
When the Teresh does bia, does it have to, he doesn't need das, does he? For the
For what?
Yibum.
If it's for the Dvarim Hamurim B'Parsha, you're right. He doesn't need das. But if you want to go beyond the Dvarim Hamurim B'Parsha to create a full-fledged Nisuin, then the Yavam needs a bia gemura, which means a bia with das. If he's a cheresh, unless he gets some very good physician to straighten him out, he'll never be able to achieve that bia midah.
I had a similar question because it at one point in the Gemara it was mashma that if there was an erison and then the cheresh did nesuin, that he could feed her truma. So
Correct,
question is,
because we're going to suspend, right, according to Rav, in that case, we're going to suspend the gzera of Arusa, and we're going to go back to the Doraisa of Kinyan Kaspa.
So in other words, because he made the erison properly when he was not a cheresh.
So she's an Eshes Ish. Now he needs Nisuin. Now, what does he need Nisuin? If he needs Nisuin to be Yoresha, to be Metamela, to be Mefred and Dorea, that he can't achieve, he's a cheresh. But if he needs Nisuin to remove and undermine the Gzera D'Rabbanan of an Arus eating Truma, that he can achieve with a facade, with a fake Nisuin, which means that he takes her out of the house and the dominion of her father into his house, and henceforth she can eat Truma. We go back to the Doraisa Halach of Kinyan Kas.
That will then get into the maflekas about why she can't eat truma at the beginning.
No, I don't think so, because we might have shown. If you're worried about Simpon, he's the Labar Das. And not only that, he's going to check her out because he's taking her into his rishus. If on the other hand, you're worried about her feeding her relatives truma, and she's out of her father's house. Kachane Ivanti. That's how I understood it. On the level of Daf Yomi. Again, beyond Daf Yomi, Yevamot is one of the most challenging Masechtas in Shas. What we did in this last 55 minutes, if we wanted to do it justice, would take about 55 hours.
Right. Hey, Yashikar, I have to go daven.
I also have to go, but not to daven. I missed mincha, but I'll catch a late mincha.
Go ahead.
Good. How are you?
You should turn off the recording.
Okay.